You're listening to Sirva Soundbites, the official podcast of Sirva, the leading global relocation and moving services company. Are you ready? Let's get started with today's episode. Mobility Value Matters.
Hi, and welcome to Sirva Soundbites, where we aim to connect, inform, educate, and entertain our listeners. I'm your host, Judee Duran. I'm a Director of Global Advisory Services at Sirva. And today we're deep diving into a topic that's transforming how global mobility professionals position themselves within their organizations. The concept is mobility value matters. For too long, mobility has been viewed primarily as a cost center, a necessary expense for moving employees all around the world and supporting with any compliance requirements in tax and immigration. But what if we could shift that narrative? What if we could demonstrate that mobility isn't just about managing costs, but about delivering real, measurable value to the business? And joining me today is Katherine Lu, the Global Head of Employee Mobility at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. She's going to be sharing her insights on how mobility professionals on her team can reframe conversations with business leaders, measure ROI beyond traditional metrics, and proactively position mobility as a value center that drives workforce strategy and business outcomes. So, Katherine, let's get started and welcome to Sirva Soundbites.
Thanks, Judee. That seems like a tall order, by the way, so I'll do my best. So thank you for having me.
I don't actually think it's that much of a tall order. We've talked about so many different things that it's a matter of trying to figure out how to now synthesize and storytell the value that your team brings, right? So I think as we go through some of these conversations, it'll be really fascinating to hear what you have to say, but also how we can also package it for this particular podcast. So I'm curious. So I want to start a little bit further on the back end first, right? So reframing mobility from cost center to value center. So as I mentioned before, there's a common perception that mobility is purely a cost center. Immigration, tax, relocation expenses. Sirva is a vendor, as an example. So how do you reframe that conversation with business leaders, right? How do you help them see mobility as a value center, not a profit center, not a cost center, but one that drives business outcomes rather than just an expense line?
So I actually love this question, by the way, because this is the question that I grapple with all the time. And I think that's really about, number one, you have to understand who your audience is, who your stakeholders are, and how you support them. Something that I will say is I think there's certainly a perception that mobility is very expensive. And as we know, expensive, non-expensive, it's all relative, right? And I don't necessarily disagree with that sentiment. But the way that I look at it is it's not purely an expense, right? Mobility is really an investment. When you look at tax, immigration, relocation, our core pillars of mobility, every facet is really an investment in what we're trying to achieve from a corporate strategy perspective, be that from an individual as a person, how we're trying to invest in talent, or it could be a corporate project like moving our headquarters, which of course HP has done when we moved from the Bay Area to Houston.
Mm-hmm.
That's a corporate driven project, right? That's part of our broader corporate strategy. Or it can be such other projects, like when we look at our location strategy, what makes sense? I think the important thing to really think about, and this is how I think my team operates, is whenever we're tackling a certain project or initiative or something, it could be on a small scale or a broader scale, we think about what is the opportunity that we as HPE we're trying to realize. And any investment, there's an opportunity that you're trying to realize, right? The same goes for someone on Wall Street. The same goes for people doing sales. We're all trying to realize a certain opportunity. And so I think when we have that kind of mindset, you can really see what kind of value you're trying to derive. And I think to your opening piece, it's can we measure every single facet of value? I don't think we can, but I think that if we have a common goal or outcome and we understand what kind of what kind of opportunity we're trying to realize, it's much easier to work towards that narrative that mobility can deliver a tremendous amount of value. So Um, that changes all the time, as you know, Judy. I know we're in similar roles in the past, and you've been in a position just like mine not too
Mhm.
long ago. But I think that's kind of where we are right now in our roadmap and how we're communicating to our businesses.
And I love that framing that you had, that each individual, whether it's or each circumstance that you've dealt with, whether it's an individual or if it's a project, at the end of the day, human capital is capital, right? There is some form of value that is being provided with regards to how an employee is hired, why they're hired, and the purpose of their productivity towards that organization. And so, um, I'd love to hear if you have any examples of how your team has proactively approached that type of situation that is coming from the business or vice versa with a mobility solution, and how you identified that opportunity, but also how did you also present that as an outcome to the business leaders?
Mm, So multi-piece question.
Yeah,
So
sorry, a
maybe
lot of
I'll
layers.
like just like mobility, so it's right on theme. So I think that when we're approaching anything, right, we work with our businesses very closely. We work with our HR partners very closely. I'll say like as a foundational concept and how this is how I choose to lead, this is how my team chooses to lead, is we approach everything with curiosity. So when we enter any type of conversation, I don't think that we try to deliver a solution right away. We ask questions. We understand again, to your point, what's the outcome? What is the goal that you're trying to achieve?
Mhm.
Because based on the goal, we're going, or based on the intent, we might change our direction. We might think that, okay, well, your goal is to onboard 15,000 people. Well, I don't think that's the truth, but your goal is to onboard 15,000 people by a certain date. So maybe we prioritize speed over cost in this scenario. Maybe we're trying to hire a certain amount of junior talent. Then maybe cost is not something that we'll invest as heavily in, right? So I think it's again, we look at intent, then we look at outcomes, but we approach everything with a lot of curiosity. We ask questions and we try to figure out what is that happy medium or that equilibrium where we can all operate. And so I'll give a specific example or a story of, and this is not really purely on me, but this is where my team has really done a fantastic job. As part of our location strategy, we made a decision to grow in a particular location. And that, of course, it requires partnership throughout the organization because this is something much bigger than, let's say, a one-way move for one individual person. It's a corporate initiative.
Mhm.
And then what my team did is they looked at, okay, well, let's look at some data. What have you done and where have you been successful? Where have you not been successful? And can mobility fill in some of those gaps?
Hmm.
So it's like saying, I'll just give very high level examples. Let's say we want to hire 100 people in a certain location and we've exhausted the talent pipeline. Then my team, um, that's one of the privileges of mobility, right? We have access to essentially global talent. And
Yeah.
if we operate it in the right way, we have access to the best and the brightest. And so we designed certain packages, of course, with the help of Sirva. And we said, based on this job level, this would make sense because you have this cost, but this level of speed. And that's what we need in this
Mm.
scenario. And then they also looked at the different facets. Okay, well, what is this going to cost us from a tax perspective? What is this gonna add to the timeline from an immigration perspective? And then we looked at the immigration scenarios and said, okay, well, if we bring in from this certain country, we actually have access to a whole different group of visa classifications, and that
Mm.
gives us a lot of agility because what the business told us and what our partners in HR told us is we never knew that this was possible. And that's what I love to hear. I love to hear, I never knew that this was possible because it shows that um, not only just the partnership, right? But it shows that we're bringing ideas to the table. And that's what gets me kind of the most excited about mobility. And then to kind of answer your last question about the outcomes, I think this has done, right? It's put us in a position where I'll talk about our own outcomes, right, as a team. It's put us at a position where we can continue to pitch ideas because we've had success in a certain area. So that's number one. But number two, now the way that the business thinks or the way that our HR partners thinks, they know that there's so many more possibilities, just like how they answer that question. I never knew that this was possible.
Yeah.
And I just love that so, so much. And I'll tell you that this is something that's still very much underway from a project perspective, but there's been a lot more agility. So we can already see some of that ROI. We can already see some of the initiatives paying off. So it's been a lot of fun. So at the end of the day, the team is having a lot of fun, and there's a lot of partnerships across the board. So a long answer, Judy, to a multi-layered
No,
question, but I
that's
hope it
great.
addresses some of it.
No, I love that because I think that you touched on a few things where you found a business, not necessarily a problem, but an opportunity. And so you
Hmm.
utilized, to the best of your knowledge, like you said, your vendors, your experience, your team, the backgrounds, what you do know, what you don't know, and try to fill some of those gaps. So if there is a faster processing time for specific citizenships, visas, all these
Hmm.
things, maybe now all of your talent acquisition is more targeted to those different
Hmm.
locations, right? And so that kind of outside the box thinking isn't just a matter of here's a package that we can deliver, but rather here's what we recommend as a package, but also here's
Exactly.
other pieces that we recommend based on data and based on information to support their timeline, their requirements, and the skill sets that is needed for whatever growth or business goals there are. So that's where I think you're making a difference in the way that you communicate, because you're not just saying here's 15 days of temporary accommodation, but rather here's 15 days of temporary accommodation, but also here's where we actually think this group or this area or this specific focused targeted, skills is a recommendation. And that's where you get the we didn't know this was possible, right? Because
Hmm.
that's where mobility really shines. We have that background. So, and in that regard, do you find that the way that you communicate changes from process to now outcomes? Like when you face your team versus when you face HR business partners versus when you face business leaders? What is the
Absolutely.
different communication styles you find? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So it's all about speaking that same language, right? Like even though we're all speaking one language, we're all speaking a different corporate language at times. We use a lot of jargon in our everyday life, and so it's about figuring out what resonates with the group, right? What resonates with your audience. So when we're looking at outcomes, for example, and this I think all leans into the same theme, right? Um, Approaching things with curiosity and understanding, right? So often at times I'll tell you that when someone's asking you a question, it's because they already know what they want. They just want the solution of how to get there, right? I think that's what we see all the
That's
time,
very
right?
relatable.
Like, right? Exactly. So what they're having trouble with is how do I get there, right? And tell me why I should do it this way. So often at times, and I have the same exact struggle at times when I'm looking to at outside consultants or outside counsel or my vendor ecosystem. I'm looking that I need this done, but I don't necessarily know what questions to ask. So can you
Mm,
help me? Can you help me drop the questions that I don't know? And that's where the team can deliver value. That's where, and this goes the same for I think all professions, right? And how we work with our partners in the ecosystem as well. It's can you help me figure out the question that I don't know how to ask? And I think that's the first piece of the language bit. Um, and then again, I think we often at times can be boggled down by details. Sometimes we don't need every single detail because then it starts to become very, very tactical and very, let's say, driven by a certain process. But not every scenario will be fit for a certain process, right? So I think that I like to approach things very high level at first, and then make sure that we are first solving the question of what's the question or what's the issue that we're trying to solve.
mm.
And then once we get there, I think it's very easy to have a productive conversation and once everyone's on the same page. So that's a lot of fun too.
No, I think that's great. I think that's a fantastic approach in understanding where your different audiences are coming from and then adjusting and ensuring that you all have kind of a baseline understanding by opening up some of those curious, like curiously open-ended questions, right? Because
Hmm.
you don't know what you don't know. And so if you start asking your internal stakeholders what their priorities are, what the goal or the purpose of this is, whether it's, let's say, with FP&A and budget, whether it's HR business partner and skills, or if it's the business leaders with a project or something, all of those answers are going to be different because that's based
Hmm.
on their perspective. And so you take that and then you even apply it to your external vendors, which, then you ask them based on this information, what kind of other questions should I be asking or answering or digging deeper into? Because those are what actually gets down to the baseline of that foundation to have some kind of solution that is relatable to everybody. And so
Hmm.
what type of signals do you generally look for in the markets to start off in these, the kickoff stages, in some of these ways that you start to ask questions, any company announcements, expansion plans, hiring challenges, all these things that where you and your team aren't just being reactive, but rather you have your
Hmm.
foundations of all your programs and the way that you're structured, in terms of the way that your team works, who they work with, all the vendors they work with, and how it's all initiated, for example. So then what do you do to become more proactive as being more of that strategic input into some of those business plans?
Hmm. So I will say that at HP, I do feel that to a certain extent, well, not to a certain extent, honestly, to the probably the nth degree, that the team is very privileged in that we're often looped in when there's an opportunity. But that's taken a lot of time, right? Because now people understand how to use mobility effectively as an organization, and that might be a culture piece.
Mm.
But I will say we're in a position where there's a pretty solid understanding of mobility as a whole, and I think that's partly because of the way that mobility has been used all the way up to the C-suite.
Mm.
So it is a heavily leveraged program, and that helps us a lot. So we do have a little bit of an edge there,
That's great.
Judy. Um, from the signals perspective, I think it's like a two-way street, right? In building these relationships, sometimes we'll be approached by, hey, this announcement has gone out. What can we do to partner together based on XYZ? Other times we'll be like, hey, we've heard of this. We know that you're doing this. Is there an opportunity to collaborate? And often at times, there's a third bucket where it's, hey, we're working on this specific initiative that's mobility related, and we reel in our partners. We reel in, let's say, corporate travel, say, hey, we need a little bit of data on this, or we need help with this, or we look at our partners in international tax and say, like, hey, we're looking at this concept. Does this make sense from a tax perspective, like a corporate tax perspective? So it's all about again, having those relationships so that you can approach anything in a kind of a way that it's like we are all trying to do our best and we all have a common goal, and that's to deliver the most value for HP as a company. Um, so we do pick up signals in different ways, and we do put out signals in different ways as well. I won't say that there's a perfect formula, but there's a lot of partnership throughout the organization, which helps us a lot.
And I want to tap in a little bit in something that you touched in the previous sentence that you said. So there's parts where you work on different programs or different solutions, and then you check in with, for example, corporate tax or corporate travel and other parts of the business.
Hmm.
How did you and your team, and even from your experience, Catherine, how did you know that corporate tax, for example, should be involved into a particular project or something like that? Like, where does that come from? Because mobility generally is not as involved, but is there something that from your experience or something that has happened that where you're like, you know what, every now and then we probably should check in with corporate tax?
Well, I think you're kind of alluding to it, but yes, everyone makes mistakes, right? And there will be times that we'll look at certain things or projects and we're like, oh, in hindsight, I wish that I asked corporate travel if this made sense. Like, we haven't been burnt in the past, but you live and you learn and you figure those out. I also have a team of of SMEs.
Mm.
So based on their area of their skill set, their knowledge area, they kind of know where the areas would present some risk, right? And so they
Hmm.
know, hey, well, maybe let's tap into this. This is our stakeholder list. Whenever we look at kind of a major project, we do outline who are our stakeholders and who are the ones who are going to make a decision, for example. And then I think they do a pretty good job on kind of engaging with those stakeholders. So we don't again we don't have a perfect formula.
Yeah.
It's not always that we know that, hey, every single time we have a project we have to engage with corporate travel, but we do know kind of where the risks are. And then so when you're looking at it from a risk perspective, it's kind of easy to know who should be engaged, because
Mm.
that certain level of risk, it'll signal you, right, which partner you have to reach out to. And some of that comes with time.
Yeah.
It's not that you can enter, for example, enter an organization and know who those all those players are. It all comes, maybe to your earlier point, we're kind of in a people business, right? It's about knowing the
Yeah.
right people and the right resources. um, so I guess right now it's a little bit of luck, Judy.
Maybe this is just me, but I think you're kind of selling yourself a little bit short here. I don't think it's luck. I think well, you touched on a little bit where you discussed where your focus or your baseline of how you approach things is out of curiosity. So if you
Hmm.
open up things with curiosity and being open-ended, then you are able to ask the questions of why or why not, right? And
Absolutely.
so when you have those conversations with your internal stakeholders, then they might answer in some of their knowledge, right? Whether it's in your
Hmm.
team or it's in, let's say, your payroll team, they might say, "Oh, corporate tax might have more awareness of it." And I think this is where I think you're not, it's not luck. I think the way your approach and the theory or your philosophy
Thank
of
you.
being curious is actually how you got there, because you're not just assuming or you're not just taking orders in that sense. You're presenting it in a way that we're learning about ourselves and we're learning about all the different stakeholders. So this is kind of a dual, beneficial or a mutual beneficial
Hmm.
structure at the end of the day. And so in that regard, what kind of advice would you give to other organizations that might not be in as strong relationships, for example, with their internal stakeholders?
So I think that, and maybe this is to the luck piece, but I think that I never try to make anything harder for someone to do their
Mm.
job. I only want to make things easier for you. And the same goes for, I hope that you make things easier for me, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe just some general areas of where we've been successful in the past and areas that I hope that we continue to work on is number one, make things easy for people. If
Mm.
you already know, and I use this as an example all the time, if you already know that they have a deadline and speed is of the essence, don't drag them down by taking 7 weeks to respond to what they're asking for, right? These are basic things, but if you know that something's urgent, don't get in someone's way. Make it easy for them and show what kind of solution that you can deliver. That goes a long way, just like how it would go a long way for me.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess just blanket statement is make things easier for people. Nobody wants to struggle at the end of the day. We all have, I think, to a certain degree, we have a common goal, and that's to get whatever project off the ground, get whatever needs to be done. So make it easy for people. Make it easy for me. That's what I ask of my vendors. Please make it easy for me.
Yeah, I know our team is working diligently very hard to make
Absolutely, absolutely.
things as easy as possible. And so, if those are the first steps, which is, try to make things easy for whoever you work with and shifting in terms of how it pushes through in your objectives and their objectives, what do you find is the outcome when those conversations start to happen? Do you find that your conversations with your stakeholders shift? Do they start to invest a little bit more time to give you more feedback or more collaborative projects? Or do you find that there's still a bit of a resistance, or do you find that it's different with each stakeholder?
I think the latter, right?
Okay.
I think it will depend, certainly. It'll certainly depend. But I think that when you do make things easy, right, and you don't create trouble for others, there's just that culture of collaboration becomes
Mhm.
very different, right? Then I know that, for example, there's certain stakeholders that I'll go to, and I can go to them for a 5-minute conversation, be like, hey, can I run this idea by you? And at the end of that conversation, they'll give me direction or they'll help me think through something that I didn't know. Like, again, I love knowing, I love learning. So I love knowing things I didn't know. And that means so much to me because I then have right from that 5-minute conversation, there's something that I can go ahead and action, or there's something that I know that there's something that I can do as a next step.
Mm.
So it's kind of like investing in those relationships, right? It's kind of like um, figuring out what people value,
Mm.
all to the theme of this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, your different stakeholders have different priorities or different outcomes
Hmm.
themselves. You're the mobility experts, you're the mobility team. You have the expertise on those pieces. They're not mobility experts, but they are, for example, FP&A, HR business partners,
For
talent,
sure.
business leaders. So their priorities is connected to yours, but it's not the same. So
For sure.
I've always said if the purpose of mobility is not for your employees to know what mobility is, but to be the hired engineer, be the hired CFO, be the hired person
For
so
sure.
that they can do those jobs, right? They didn't
Hmm.
hire them to be mobility experts. And so in those regards, like do you find where, how your communication styles have evolved ever since you've taken over the team. And, as you mentioned, you were, I don't know if it's luck. I still don't believe in luck in this regard because I feel like you guys have worked really hard to get to where you are. And so you have that heavily leveraged edge
Hmm.
with mobility and to the point that the C suites all have an awareness of who you are. Because in most scenarios, I think mobility is kind of a forgotten, lonely island at sometimes. And it's like, oh, we're an invisible, function that does
Hmm.
things on the back end, but you're not at that stage. And so, what are the things that you find that are constantly evolving to maintain that stage, evolve, or there might be changes in the business where you have to maybe there's new leaders and you have to reevaluate or
Hmm.
re-educate them over again.
Hmm. Um, so this is it's a little bit about like embracing change,
Mm.
right? And I think that's what we're all very good at in the mobility industry because we are often at times at the at the mercy of different things, right? It could be regulatory shifts or
Mm-hmm.
regulatory changes. It could be it could
Markets
be
or anything.
exactly, or
Yeah.
right now what we're dealing with the housing markets, right? For example, what's going on in the Middle East, we're often at the mercy of everything that's happening in the market that's outside of our control. So there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely ways to combat that. And I think it's that continuous stream of communication. And we do this in different ways. It could be through newsletters, it could be through quarterly engagements, quarterly dashboards. We have so much on our docket as it relates to communication so that things are constantly being refreshed. And this has kind of offered the business a lot of insight into what's happening in mobility.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a great example because those are things that necessarily aren't directly impacting the business, but you have the foresight to provide guidance
Mhm.
or awareness into the business of things that might impact and will likely impact, operations, anything in those areas. And so you're not necessarily just an order taker, but you're now a bit of the news because it's like, hey, these are things that are occurring, and next thing you know, it's like those are things that people do tend to remember, but it's the constant, proactiveness that your team constantly pushes through, which I think is really
Mhm.
exceptional in that regard, which is helpful. And
Thank
so
you.
I think we've covered, yeah, I think we've definitely covered quite a bit. And so I have two last questions, and I promise, and this is the last one, last two that we'll go through. One is if you could define mobility's value in one word, what would it be?
Agile.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. I like that very much. And then the other one is, so what is one golden nugget or a key takeaway that you'd like to share with the HR and mobility leaders listening or watching this podcast right now? What is your lasting word, I would say?
Oh, this is a hard one. And I honestly, this one I think will change, right? It's not an evergreen statement.
You're going on agile.
So
You're going on your agile theme right now, though, which is
I
really,
am,
really
because that's really
funny.
how my brain works. Um, I think it's that my golden nugget is embrace change, approach approach every scenario with curiosity, but also with understanding.
Right. No, I think that's a really lovely way to put it, and it shows opportunity, but also growth, all at the same time. So, Catherine, thank you again so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. This has been such a valuable conversation about how we can shift mobility from a cost center to more of a value center. And I know our listeners will hopefully walk away with more actionable strategies to elevate their own programs.
Thanks, Judy. It's always good to have a conversation with you, so thank you.
No problem. I hope one of these days we'll catch up again in Texas and have a meal over some barbecue. Texas barbecue is always my go-to. So I'm happy to do that.
For sure.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, remember, you already know the subject matter expertise, the programs, the people, and experiences, just like Catherine has used with her team and her internal and external stakeholders. The challenge is reframing how you communicate that value that eventually provides the outcomes to your business leaders. Be proactive in identifying opportunities, and most importantly, position mobility as an essential to your organization's workforce strategy. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop us a note at sirvasoundbites@sirva.com. Until then, this is Judy and Catherine, and don't forget, Sirva provides everything needed to move talent and deliver experience. Until next time.